Today on Rates and Barrels, I'm thinking about Yu Darvish and microtonal math rock.
And while you're thinking about that, there's a player on the field thinking about sequential command modeling.
What are you thinking about, Eno?
I'm thinking it's time. Let's go.
Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It's Thursday, May 14th. Derek Van Riper, Eno Saris, Trevor May here with you on this episode. We got some pitching injuries to talk about. We're going to dig into a fascinating topic, or at least one that the three of us think is pretty fascinating. How many pitches could the best pitcher actually throw? How big could that constellation actually get with manipulation of different shapes and all sorts of different techniques that could be applied? Got another model that we may talk about later on in the show as well from a somewhat unexpected source. But first, before we dive into all that, Trevor, how you doing on this Thursday?
Good. I'm tired.
Are you pitching today? Are you in?
No. This is a red day. This is a no. Let's just assume I pitched 3 days in a row. And I can pull the
Because that's
shoe.
how you feel.
That's how I feel. Yeah, that's how I feel. I feel like I pitched 3 days in a row, and I'm pulling the chute on. I look at my teammates right in their eyes and be like, it's your job tonight.
Eno, can you give us 2 out of the pen?
Yes, I'm ready. I'm ready to go. I'm feeling good. I finally got a good night's sleep. The day after my long runs, that night I always sleep well.
Yeah, I got to get out there again. All right, I'm good for mop-up duty, but I'm not going to be effective. It's just going to be, I'll wear it for the rest of you if we can't get through it as a group today. But let's start with some baseball news you should know. Bryce Miller is back and with more velocity, so I think that's pretty exciting. We did get some confirmation. The Mariners, for at least a little while, are going to turn to a 6-man rotation, so Emerson Hancock retains a rotation spot, doesn't lose out. They don't have to bump Luis Castillo. They don't have to IL anybody right now. They'll just probably let that play out on its own. But what were your assessments of Miller in his first start of 2026,
Thought he looked great. He sat 97.6. He kept his velocity late into the game. And, there's a pitch labeled a slider and a pitch labeled a cutter. They look like the same thing to me. So I think it's basically a gyro slider. I think maybe the true cutter is gone, but it is a nice constellation with the four-seamer, the splitter being the main pitches against left-handers, and then against right-handers, he's kind of he's really fastball heavy, but he still throws 4 or 5 pitches. So he's all about that fastball, so I'm glad to see the ride and the velo were there. He might be more tied to his fastball velo and shape than any other pitcher in baseball, just because how much he throws it and how good of a pitch it is.
All good signs for Bryce Miller that first time back.
You mentioned this at the top, but the rest of the situation is pretty interesting to me because Luis Castillo has been declared toast by most of our Discord, and there's a lot of people who are snap dropping him and think that it's over for Luis. But in terms of fastball velo stuff, strikeouts and walks, his early season this year is an exact match to last year. And I know he started slow last year. He's a regular slow starter, and so I'm giving him time to figure this out with the track record that he's got. Emerson Hancock, on the other hand, has also lost 3 inches of ride on that four seam, which was, a big deal to why he was so successful this year. It was the sort of the new ride on the four seam with the lower arm slot. So there are a couple moving parts here, and I don't think it's a fait accompli that Luis Castillo's out of the rotation, and so I think the 6-man guy go for a little bit.
I think everyone's been a little jumpy all season, self-included. I don't want to declare anyone toast in the middle of May, especially with a player with a track record like Luis Castillo's. I think he's still aging reasonably well, but aging nonetheless. And I think 2 numbers jump off the page right now. 364 BABIP. I mean, it's a 285 career guy, so pretty unlucky on balls in play, at least to some degree, and a 59% left on base percentage. So those 2 things in combination will blow up your ratios. Now, there's other stuff that is, like a larger trend, more concerning. The home run rate's up a little bit again. That's been part of a longer term thing ever since he really got to Seattle. Not a big surprise there. And some of that poor BABIP might be deserved. 51.6% hard hit rate. He is getting punished at a rate we have not seen before. So I think there's, the question of bounce back to what? Trevor, do you think it's fair to say that at this stage, Luis Castillo could still get somewhere close to a high 3s ERA and a low 120 sort of whip? It's kind of where the more optimistic projections have landed on Castillo. Is that a reasonable expectation?
Yeah, I think it's as reasonable for him as anybody in terms of how consistent he tends to get and go on runs of hyper consistency, and he's been that way his whole career. There's not many guys who have had historically the higher floor, lower ceiling. He's not really riding a roller coaster and hasn't a lot in his career. So if he gets into that mode, it's absolutely possible. You'll look up, he's thrown 6+ innings, two or less runs 5, 6, 7 times in a row. Like that's probably going to happen at some point. The only concerning thing is how quickly he's going to adjust to, because he's such a fastball heavy guy, and he's always been a fastball heavy guy, and we're just seeing losing a tick year over year, which is to be expected. He's thrown a lot of innings in his career, and at what point does that usage start to reflect a decline in being able to get away with so many fastballs? That's going to be it for me, because that's what's accounting for the ball getting squared up so heavily right now. But if you could just find a way to give up a little softer contact, maybe those BABIP numbers and those hard hit numbers equalize or level out a little bit, and then you're back to the old you. It's just he's been pretty stubborn when it comes to throwing fastballs his whole career, even when in tough stretches like this, and he just kind of sticks with it and usually comes back. But it was 97, 98, 99, and then it's 96, 97, and it's seen a lot of 4s and some 3s this year. So if that's the trend, that's usually when you got to start figuring some other things out. So I think we might be at that point where experimenting a little bit more for Castillo needs to happen. So I'll be paying attention to that.
Bring the changeup back. I don't know where the changeup went. It needs to come back.
It's a great time for it. That would be. It's a pitch too. He can roll out of bed and throw. It's not like his slider is a plus pitch, or that it has a great movement profile. It's just with the number of fastballs he throws and his low arm angle, it plays really well. But yeah, the changeup might be something that needs to get back into the rotation and get maybe the ball off the barrel a little bit more.
The other news item from that Mariners game on Wednesday, Cal Raleigh left with a possible right side injury. He's sitting out Thursday's matinee against the Astros. Similar injury cost him 3 games earlier this month. I would not be surprised if leading into Friday's series opener, if we got an update that maybe a short IL stint is going to be necessary, because second time you have an injury like that, usually you're going to miss more time. You miss more than 3 games, you might as well just take the full 10-day break and try to let that thing heal up, because clearly Cal Raleigh has just not been himself. Even his pre-2025 self up to this point in the season, I think health is at least a pretty significant part of that so far. Max Fried left early with an injury, MRI scheduled for Thursday. I have not seen the results as of the time of this recording. It would delay the how do they make everyone fit in the rotation question, with Garrett Cole getting back from the IL here later on this month. But TBD, I guess, is the status on Fried. I saw some comments from him. He seemed optimistic in his comments, but that's kind of common for post-game comments about an injury.
Is that because it's posterior? Trevor, interior is where the UCL injuries are, or the UCL soreness is, right? Posterior on the outside of the elbow is a different thing?
So yeah, interior is usually inside, but it depends on what posterior would be on the up here on this side. Yeah. So yeah, that is a usually a better sign. Now my tear was on the back side, like straight in the middle. So I don't know if it depends on what's that, if they mean like the tricep backside area, because that's where it connects. But anterior and posterior usually means like literally inside and outside. So if it's out here, the things that go on out there are usually like your flexor mass kind of wraps around. So flexor muscles, which are very strong. That
can be bad too, but that can
also be bad. But like it's also very hard to it's very like tear it and for it to be a Tommy John situation. Or it's like a nerve. There's the humeral nerve that runs on the outside, which I had some nerve stuff go on at some point, and it was actually easier to handle than most things. So like that's usually the 2 things that are going on out there. I'm not going to speculate here because I don't really know. But yeah, if you're going to hear There's some discomfort on a inside or outside of the elbow. Outside is usually better than the inside.
Now I'm thinking about the valgus extension overload possibilities again, because I believe that's a back of the elbow sort of problem that you'll run into on occasion. It's the one that Cole Reagans just got diagnosed with about a week or so ago. Kyle Bradish was really good in that game against the Yankees, by the way. I think a lot of folks that had been waiting on a turnaround for fantasy purposes had him on the bench because they figured that turnaround might happen. It's probably not happening against the Yankees. Lo and behold, 7 Ks, 1 hit, 6 scoreless innings. So you were rewarded if you just left him in or had the courage to leave him in, but probably on a lot of benches, maybe the sign of some better days to come for Kyle Bradish.
The nice thing about Bradish's last 2 starts are they were his best 2 in terms of command. And I think the stuff has been there generally because it's all about his breaking ball. And, the fastballs have never been that great. And so to get the command back, is a really good sign, I think.
Some news from the Marlins. Robby Snelling hit the 15-day IL with a UCL sprain. It's another wait and see. Imaging will reveal whether or not this is going to be a Tommy John situation or not. Braxton Garrett was recalled in the corresponding move to start on Thursday. And they got Pete Fairbanks back, so I guess that's good news. But just a huge bummer coming off the Major League debut of Snelling to hit the shelf already.
Yeah, it's the top of the world to the not pretty quick. I hate how many pitchers get hurt so often now, but hopefully it's something that's not a huge deal. And there was always this is fans are gonna like. This doesn't matter for fans very much, but as players go, some of the traditional I think advice or knowledge that goes around the league that is still pretty true is you're gonna get hurt, do in the big leagues.
Yeah, I heard that. I've heard even I'm going to throw as hard as I can in the big leagues because, I'd rather be on the big league IL. But
you're gonna get Tommy John. Make sure you're in the big leagues. Like that's usually what they would say.
They also go hand in hand with the debut velo bump, which is worth about 1 mile per hour, when I've looked. So those things go hand in hand with injury, I think. And it's too bad. What I looked at past UCL sprains, it could be, if it's on the good end, he could be back in about a month. But that's like sort of grade 1, best case scenario, no surgery. Of course, the other side of that is 14 months and surgery. So, a UCL sprain is a tear. It's just a question of how much and pain and, whether or not they want to go, they can pitch through it.
Yeah, we'll see what the next few days reveal in terms of updates on Robby Snelling. Nice to see Braxton Garrett back, just not the way that we were hoping to see Garrett get that opportunity in the Marlins rotation again. We did get an update on Francisco Alvarez. He suffered a torn meniscus on Tuesday, had surgery Thursday morning. At one point, it looked like the worst case scenario was a season-ending surgery. The timetable for his return is about 8 weeks, so it must have been more of like a partial repair of that meniscus as opposed to a full. So I guess some good news there, but man, Francisco Alvarez has had some pretty awful injury luck throughout his time in the big leagues. Thumb problems, knee trouble. I mean, some of that's occupational hazard of being a catcher, of course, but around his latest couple of injuries, especially, I think we've seen a guy that could break through and still maybe be a 30-homer catcher and one that's actually at least an average or better defender behind the plate, too. It's just we keep getting these stops and starts around these various ailments. So do you share my optimism long-term about Alvarez still having that path to maybe be a top 5 catcher,
I do. I finally made the jump in my 12-team dynasty to drop Salvador Perez for Francisco Alvarez 2 days ago. So it's really, really good timing. But it's 12 teams, so I just picked up Gabriel Moreno, and I think I'll be fine. I don't know. Sal Perez the bat has been slowing, and I don't know if I believe the rest of the season projections anymore. With Alvarez, I think he can get to that kind of level at some point still, like a 240-ish average, 30, 35 homers a year. Still on the table. He's still young enough. He still hasn't hit his stride. So let's get him good and see what happens after that.
Injuries just piling up on the Mets. The good news is Juan Soto is back in the lineup Thursday. He fouled a ball off his foot, left early Wednesday night, had x-rays. Those came back negative. So At least that doesn't appear to be a situation that's going to put Soto back on the IL right now. Also interesting to note, we talked yesterday about players skipping rehab assignments, Trevor, especially on the position player side, because you get the traject machine, you got more tools at your disposal maybe that make it easier to just feel like you're ready to jump back into top level competition again. Christian Yelich took a day off for a sore back on Wednesday after coming off the IL with no rehab assignment on Tuesday. He's out of the lineup again on Thursday. And Jed mentioned that as a possible downside. It's like you don't go through quite the same physical process working in the cage, trying to build up, running pregame. It's just not quite the same. I'm just curious where you stand on like trying to come off of the IL and like different ways you can do it. Like, is there a right way to come back from the injured list in terms of skipping the rehab assignment, making sure you go on one? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
It really depends on how long you've been gone. That's the number one thing, right? But I also think that the change in the length for pitchers and hitters, like hitters can be gone for 10 days. Like it just makes more sense. That's not that long of a time, especially if they travel with the team the whole time or they were on a road trip and then they come home. It's just the flow of it makes a lot of sense, and there's travels involved, and they feel much more comfortable about that because they feel like you can at least face live pitching. Like a guy can throw a live VP or something, and there's usually always someone there for that. So there's just the options for getting a hitter back faster, I think makes a lot more sense. But it's also, you need to be in a situation where you're accurately testing that injury. And some guys feel, maybe in Yelich's case, that like playing in a AAA game, the adrenaline or whatever wouldn't really be there either. So it's like, why go through the travel? Why especially if it's a back issue, maybe don't put him on a plane if we can avoid it, like here at the beginning. Stuff like that, all this little stuff. And then you add in fact, if you win an MVP, then you can just say whatever you want and they'll just say yes. So, but pitchers definitely need to go throw to hitters. There has to be something. You have to go compete first before you're in a big league game, especially as a reliever, because they were just like, hey, we can't afford you to suck ever. So you need to be sharp when you come up here. Starting pitcher, maybe you'll come up start maybe earlier than you would have because it's a long time to be down there. But I think for position players, it makes a lot more sense. Swinging the bat makes more sense, but it just depends. Is it an oblique? Is it a leg? Like, what are we, because even if it's a leg, for example, you don't have to cut, like, even in the big, you can ease back into running full speed to first, running out, grounders, whatever. That's something that people are willing to be okay with as long as the swing feels good and go see big league hitting. So like, I think that it's an option. There are a lot of situations where it's a better option, especially with the 10-day IL. But pitchers probably should always go on one unless it was like, retroactive, and then like you get 4 days, and like it just makes a lot of sense. But it's funny, you don't throw for 2 days, it feels like you've had the whole off season off. So,
well, and I think the recent pitching return from an IL stint that we saw was Trevor Rogers. Trevor Rogers was down with an illness, pitched on April 25th, came back, pitched on Tuesday against the Yankees, 4 innings, 6 earned, couple of homers, only 3 Ks. It's like some of that could be tough matchup. Some of that could just be the layoff.
Too. His defense let him down. I watched the big inning. There was a couple plays that snowballed. He had 2 outs, and Trent Grisham hit a 3-run homer after a couple of defensive miscues. There was some sequencing there. It could have gone differently for him.
Yeah, so I think that's a minimum stint, and it wasn't an actual injury. It was an illness, so the situation might have been just right to go ahead and come back without that. But I think we're going to see that more with position players, less with pitchers, even if we see it more often overall going forward. We did see Jacob Mizorowski leave his start before the 8th inning. He was warming up, ended up kind of laughing with team trainer and Pat Murphy. I think he was cramping up again. He's been dealing with leg cramps on and off through a few different outings, so it doesn't look like anything serious is going on with Mizorowski. Another really good start from him against
Get that
the
man
Padres.
some Gatorade. Jeez,
Bananas, Gatorade. I mean, chronic cramping in
body
the legs.
weight, anything.
Yeah, some body weight.
Just some mass. I just imagine Miz is just eating Nerds clusters even more than I am. Just by the giant
100%.
handful.
He loves them. There's no way he doesn't. You're right.
I would be pretty confident in that assessment. We're gonna hit a quick break. When we come back, we're gonna dig into one of our main topics today. How many pitches could the best pitcher actually throw?
And what are microtones?
Welcome back to Rates and Barrels. This is probably the most unusual way I've ever kind of landed on a possible topic for us to discuss on the show, but probably a month or so ago in the music channel of our Discord, someone dropped in a video of a rock duo from Canada, Angine de Poitrine, and they wear ridiculous costumes. They have a guitar player, double neck guitar bass combo. They do a lot of looping, and they got a drummer. And they experiment with microtones. They use sounds that we're just not accustomed to hearing in Western music, right? Western music, generally 12 different notes. We hear a lot of semitones, half steps. Like, it's just, there's a lot of patterns that are familiar. And microtones are the sounds in between that we rarely hear. Other parts of the world, they're a lot more common and have been for a long time. But when you listen to music like Angine de Poitrine, you'll hear all sorts of stuff that sort of just tricks your brain. And I don't know how many people listening to this show will enjoy it. I kind of dig it. I think it's just different. So for that reason, I'll throw it on and it's good. But I got to thinking about this in the sense of like, okay, yeah, Western music, 12 different notes, pretty standard notes. Pitching, as we were learning about baseball and pitching when we were younger, I kind of thought of pitches like musical notes. Like you have fastballs and changeups and sliders and curveballs, and like they just fit into each bucket. And obviously the more we've learned is that within each of those pitches there are variations, and some of those have been split out with actual designations that we talk about. You know, we have sweepers now, for example. But I think what is also now like bouncing around in my head, aside from these very catchy microtonal math rock riffs, is this idea that you could manipulate every pitch even more to sort of create these extra variations that subvert the expectations of hitters. And the most extreme example, like visually, what we're talking about is if you go to the Baseball Savant page of a pitcher, look in the top right-hand corner at the pitch constellation, and just look at the clusters and just look at the different movement profiles of every pitch, and then look at the clusters themselves and see how much variation there is. Think of someone like Yu Darvish. If you need a visual, pull up his page. If you're watching on YouTube, we'll throw that on the screen. Yu Darvish seemingly has the ability to manipulate the ball, maybe as well as anybody I've watched. I mean, I just think you see it in broad number of pitches, but then even within the pitches he throws, it looks like you might see 2 or possibly even 3 different versions of that based on the movement profiles. If you start factoring in changes in velocity of those pitches, that's another way to sort of mess around with things. So I'm just kind of curious, Trevor, how messed up is my brain? And is this an actual appropriate way to think about the different ways pitches could be manipulated and or created?
No, I think you're right on. I think it's a very interesting way of talking about it. I think music is a great comp, because when people hear something that sounds weird or something they're not used to, you clock it immediately. And kind of for me, and when it comes to pitching, like I can tell, I immediately can tell when a guy throws a pitch that's supposed to move a certain way and it's somewhere in between and it's different. And from my playing days and having lots of conversations with guys, the approach to like how you think about and how you approach pitching in general. Some people, I was one of these guys, it was easier for me to think about it as these, like my slider does this thing, my fastball does this thing, my changeup does this thing, and this is where they live. So therefore there's pretty clear use cases for those things. Right. But that's also like, so I didn't think in terms of like manipulation, feel, could I get the ball to do this or whatever, because I think that a lot of times is more accepted or more, maybe bought into by guys who don't throw as hard most of the time, usually because it's out of necessity. So like that way of thinking. So some guys out there that like do this pretty naturally, or at least one that I played with and one that I've talked to about it is, Justin Steele is a guy who has kind of a grip, like he grips the baseball, and then he throws all of his pitches kind of with slight variations of that grip, and that's just how he learned to pitch. And another guy that played with in the past, another lefty, surprisingly, not surprisingly, is Brad Hand. He threw kind of a sweeper, called slider, but it was a sweeper early.
Yeah, he showed me his grips. They're the same grip.
It's the same grip. It's a two-seam. He just grips a two-seam fastball, and then he just spins one and then throws through one, and then does it. And I asked him, I was like, where'd that come from? He goes, I don't remember. Like, I just threw a sinker as a kid, and then I just was messing around and trying to throw a slider, and it was good. And for whatever his natural ability to do it, he just saw it move, and then he just kept throwing it that way, and then it just never changed. And so, like, those guys are basically going off field, but they learned field first. They found something that worked, and then now they know to distinguish between those. Sergio Romo loved to talk about how his slider was 3 different sliders, and he wanted one to go sideways, more like a sweeper. He wanted one to go straight down. He wanted one to go two-plane, like a curveball. Like, he knew those things. He just was like, but I'm just going to call it a slider because it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. But you can see his spread's pretty crazy, especially later in his career. And he was doing that on purpose. So some guys do it through, like, I throw 3 pitches, but it's really 6 pitches, Justin Steele. Or they do it through Yu Darvish and be like, here's the very specific name for every single pitch that I learned that I'm trying to throw. But that's how he thought about pitching. But at the end of the day, they're kind of doing the same thing. They're both trying to kind of cover a lot more variation, and one was trying to keep it more simple. The other one, by having it like complex and thinking about it differently, allowed them to do it as well. But it's the same thing, 2 ways of thinking about it. And Microtones, I think, is what they're doing. They're like musicians that are trying to like find interesting, unique ways, make themselves unique, and so they're finding these sounds in between the things that they do that are natural and that most people know about.
Yeah, a couple things come to mind right away. There's some great points in there. One is that I think there are 2 ways to think about microtones. One is to think about, if you're looking at this right now, Darvish, Fried, and Lugo, they're covering all the spaces. So if this was a piece of music, every little sort of space, in the sheet is being used up, so they're using up all the tones in between the tones. And if you look at the pizza box, basically every quadrant has a pitch, there's no unexplored area for the most part on these guys. I mean, they could all throw screwballs, but nobody throws a screwball. So that's, other than that, the pizza box is full. But then there's also within each pitch, you'll see Darvish, like, are those 2 splitters that you're looking at? Or is that 1 splitter? Look at the variation on the sinkers. He talked to me about how San Diego was a big part of that certain places the sinker took off. So maybe those are park factors. But, when I look at Lugo, I see variation within like so many different pitches, but also variation on the sinker. And I would totally believe that he has maybe a 1-seam and a 2-seam sinker, or maybe he has, one where he wants more fade and one where he wants more drop. I mean, he's that kind of manipulator. The other thing that comes to mind, though, is that all these guys that I just put up are curveball guys. And I was just talking to Braxton Ashcraft, and Braxton Ashcraft said one thing that he said that he called it a lost art. I don't know, that's debatable, but I do think that this is a slider league, and even these guys like Fried, kind of, at one point was all about his curveball, and then is more about his sweeper now, and learn that slider. And that was a big step forward for him. Darvish, probably throws more breaking balls that are harder than that soft curveball. But we still had Charlie Morton, Adam Wainwright. We've had the great curveball artists that were just been in the league. I don't know if it's fully gone, but the other thing he said, Braxton Ashcraft said, was, I can manipulate the ball. And I think anybody who has a curveball has heard this before. I've got the get me over curveball. I got the lollipop. The lollipop is one where you show hump on the curveball, and you do it on purpose because you want them to see the hump and not swing. That's the get me over. You show hump on purpose. And then there are ones where you want to rip it and you want to throw it so hard because you want it to come out straight. You want it to spin and sizzle and then drop. And that's the swinging strike one. That's when you want them to swing. So, that there is already a difference. And I tried to look, it's really hard to look at the full sample of a year's worth of pitches in StatCast because it's just becomes a really big slice of data, and it's a lot. So what I did, I just looked at May. And over the course of May, I looked at the differences in I looked at the median range in velocity from the max to the min for all the pitch types, just of all the pitchers that have pitched in May. Curveball had the biggest median velocity range, 4 miles an hour. Four-seam fastball was 3.6. Fastballs, I think fastballs generally have a larger one because you might have the get me over fastball. You have the get me a strike fastball. You have the, I'm going to grip this one and rip it above the zone four-seam for a swing and miss fastball. So we know that about fastballs. I was surprised the slider had the smallest, and I think maybe that's because slider's a swing and miss pitch most of the time. You want to replicate the movement on it each time. So anyway, curveballs, and then if you look at Ashcraft's curveball in particular, you can see there's if you color code by velocity and movement, you can see there might be 2 or 3 sort of different curveballs that are hidden within this curveball. So that's a couple different ways to think about micronotes. But the last thing I want to add is, we've talked about can we use the tightness of a cluster to tell us something about command? Could you look at a pitcher and say, oh, look, all of his clusters are incredibly tight. This guy must have command. He replicates the movement on all his pitches really well. I think the reason why when we study that, it doesn't turn out to show command, because you have guys like Lugo and Darvish who have great command and are doing the microtones thing, So then if you look at their clusters, you're like, oh, that's a wide cluster. Sorry, you don't have good command. Oh, do I? Or do I have 2 different pitches in there that are hiding in there? So I guess the very last thing I want to do is show, you can have who are some guys that could benefit from this. And when I think that I'm looking for, the way I did this was I looked at baseball prospectus. I looked at guys that had large movement spreads, but small pitch type probability spreads. So guys who had smaller arsenals that covered a lot of distance. And what comes up is Justin Lawrence with the Pirates. Justin Lawrence is a big sinker sweeper difference there. I would love him to have a gyro slider, much like Adam Ottavino had, just to split the difference and show up in the middle there. Andre Palante has a lot of pitches, but he does not have a gyro slider. And I think it could be useful for him just to play these big disparate distances off each other. And then Jesus Luzardo, could he have a cutter? I know he already throws a four-seam and a sinker, and I don't want to mess with his fastball shapes, which have gone in and out on him a little bit in the past. But there is a lot missing where he has 3 pitches on the arm side with movement, and then just the sweeper on the other side. So a gyro or a cutter, I think, could be interesting for Luzardo. Once the pitch is going to his glove side, it's a sweeper. There's nothing, right away it's a sweeper. So, this is about hiding pitches. It's about, playing with pitches. It's about tunneling secondary pitches off each other.
I know for a fact, by the way, Luzardo has tried both those things a lot.
Okay, good. That makes sense.
He maybe 2 years ago, first year at the Phillies, he threw a slider a lot, a gyro, and it was really, really bad. Like his sweeper being as good as it is, because it's truly a dominant pitch, he just got rid of the slider because it was just completely pointless at that time. And he tried before the slider to throw a cutter, which hurt because at that time he was throwing a sinker and he had a lot of heavy sink. Would a sinker stop moving? This is things I've read and actually.
That's the difficulty of the microtones, right?
Exactly.
Like
he's trying to find that middle, but the problem is it feels when he's between, both of the other sides get a little bit less effective.
Some guys just don't have that feel to be able to play around with it. Like you're saying, you just wanted to have a slider, throw the slider, have it be the same slider every time. Yeah. It's easier than being I've also, for what it's worth, it's not always great. I know Lorenzen has a map that has all microtones all over the place, and he told me the difference between his slider and his cutter is when he's all the way out at the end with a slider, he goes like this, and this cutter, he goes like this. I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's a feel type guy, and Luzardo might be a guy who's he needs to feel very distinct between the pitches, and I was very similar in that way too. And I think, but as I got older, it was a little bit easier because when you're younger and there's a part of like when you throw really hard, like you're going to notice something here. Like guys who throw really hard and they rely on velocity a lot. It's about like optimizing each pitch. So every pitch needs to be like super tightly clustered, which makes sometimes that drift tells you that you can microtone a little bit more if you're not super good at clustering. But if you are, throw that one. So it's like how do you handle that better? But there's options for both types of guys. The problem with Luzardo, and this is really interesting, if you can't spin anything but a sweeper very well and it takes away from everything, maybe we throw because you got feel for the changeup. That was his best pitch when he came up. It was his best pitch for a while, and maybe a splitter. But we don't. But knows lefties don't throw splitters.
Yeah.
I wanted to bring Roki Sasaki into the conversation here because I think he was also part of the inspiration for this conversation with basically 2 splitters now. Like that's kind of weird, or is it really a splitter and a fork? Like, are we just getting into another semantics thing? Because Roki also ticks the box that you were talking about a minute ago. He throws hard, so his four-seamer needs to be consistent and needs to command that well. And what I'm seeing when I look at his movement profile is this combination of the fork and the split or splits that sort of connects the slider, which is like a gyro, to the four-seamer. Like they sort of like link up now, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think you don't see guys start 2 different splitters, mostly because one usually does the job that it's supposed to do. You're trying to get depth and you're trying to get either ground balls or swings and miss. It's a swing and miss pitch. It's usually a put away pitch. And so once you get a splitter, like then what's the point? If you have a put away pitch, what's the point of throwing another one? Unless you're Roki Sasaki, you throw your fork ball, which it's the same grip for both pitches too, by the way. You can just see where the pressure is. Where the ball is touching his fingers last before he's releasing is slightly different. Fork ball, it's a little bit lower down the fingers, and the splitter is more of the fingertips. And so that's why the spin is way different coming out of his hands. His problem is his fork ball moves so much. It's got like a 60% whiff rate. When guys swing at it, like no one's hitting it, but it's in the strike zone 30% of the time. So he had no pitch that he could reliably, because his sliders hit pretty hard and his four seam doesn't have a good shape. He didn't have a pitch where he could say, I can throw this in the strike zone and I'll be okay. Like he just didn't, that wasn't a connection in his head. So what happened was he'd get behind a lot, then he'd go to his fork ball that he couldn't throw over the plate, throw in the strike zone. So what do? The fork ball is something you can roll out of bed and do, and it's one of the best pitches movement-wise, hardest to hit in the league. Let's use that. What are you naturally really good at? Let's give you something that you can command better. And that's a splitter. And then he's got Yamamoto on his team, who's a great guy to learn a splitter from, like a true splitter that's 90 miles an hour. Of course, he throws it now. It's 192, and he's throwing it way more for strikes. Now, I haven't quite seen him use it as a bridge. He's using it like it was his fork now. But he's still throwing his fork a little bit, but it's like, I think if he can make the connection, like this is the one I throw in the strike zone. This I can throw mid counts. I can throw his first pitch and put that in their head, but the fork is still going to appear late in the at bat usually, and I'm going to make them choose if it's the splitter or the fork ball, and that's not a good decision to have to make, right? And then all he's got to do is mix one fork ball on a 1-1 count and have a guy just swing out of his shoes at it, and now you're in the driver's seat. So I want to see that happen. I haven't quite seen it happen yet, but having that option that's in between microtoning, which is nice, but also his ability to command it, where he's like, I thought this was strike zone, it might just be a soft ground ball at second too. Like, I don't think I'm going to give up a homer as much with this pitch if it's in the strike zone. Like, that's oftentimes all you need to just not get behind all the time. It's just a confidence thing. You have a pitch, one option versus 0 options.
Yeah, I know it's semantics, but I'd almost call it a splinker to him, so that he thinks about this is, so it's one of my fastballs, So I think of this as one of my fastballs. It even occupies a space where you could consider it a splinker. I mean, it's got the arm side, it's harder. And then lastly, if you look at his heat maps, everything you're saying, it comes into focus here. The split finger's in the zone more. He's got one that he can throw in the zone. The forkball, he has a real hard time throwing in the zone. So we wanted him to throw a two-seamer for a while, Roki. We thought about a cutter, and he was a definite Microtones guy where he had the four-seam up here, the slider down here, and this fork down here, and there's all this empty space in the pizza box. And now with the splitter. And then lastly, you were right about the usage, Trevor. When he first brought in the splitter, it was, he had 2 games where it was just a splitter. Instead of the forkball. So he just, it's the last 2 games where he's really using both of them. And I think I have more hope now for him than I ever had. And
I do too. I agree.
I think this is a way forward for him. It might not be bad to throw a sinker as well. Maybe there'll be a cutter later. A big curveball would be interesting because there's this whole space opposite his four seam that he's just not using at all. But at least now, there's he can do something that takes pressure off his four seam. It was either four seam or slider to try and get in the zone, and the slider's not great. So, the splitter could be a big deal for him going forward. And I think he's maybe the poster child in some ways. Another guy that I think of is Andrew Abbott. If you look at his chart, he's got the four seam and change at the top, and then he's got the sweeper and the curve. Once it comes against riders, he doesn't really throw the sweeper. So he's basically four seam curveball change. There's all this space in the middle that I think could be taken up by something else.
That's actually a lot like Justin Steele's constellation of pitches too. I'm trying to figure out if Abbott is just like a similar pitcher to Steele with a little less feel, a little less velo, a little less of everything, and that's why we see some more extreme downsides. But why is it hard to throw a gyro in particular, to have something that fits in the middle of this entire movement profile cluster? What makes it difficult?
Are gyros hard, Trevor?
Yeah, gyros are generally hard. Honestly, there's a little part of it being, it just doesn't move as much as other pitches. And in general, that is not super encouraged to have pitches that don't move as much. Like if you're going to throw a breaking ball, you might have if you can throw something of the same velocity, for example, if you can throw a 0-0 slider at 87, but you can throw a harder sweepery one at 85, they're going to be like, do the sweepery one. Like the gyro is pointless. And I'll be honest, I ran into this problem my last year. I always had a better than 0-0. It was like a -3, bigger, mid 80s to high 80s. Like it really solved the problem for me. And then I added my sweeper. Like that pitch had like a 4% whiff rate my last year. Like the lowest that it's ever been. It was still moving the same, but the sweeper had a really high one. So I went to that for the swing and miss. But like that, it was the same movement pitches, and then it was just being adjusted for because it was in between. So like staying out of the 0-0 is seems to be what they're trying to do. And maybe it's a subconscious thing. Maybe it's like not even explicitly said, but like it is, hey, if we can, let's get like a cutter that's just moving across the body, or the weird like dead ball, or the gyro slow death ball thing that got people, the MI, where you're like, just have it go straight down.
Get below zero. Just
below zero.
0-0 has been traditionally something where it is weird. It doesn't look good, and like pitchers are like, that doesn't move as much as other pitches. You're from the time you're a 10-year-old, you're chasing movement, And I think also like stuff models may not love it, especially if you don't throw it 88. If you throw a 84 mile an hour gyro, the stuff model is not going to say that you did a good thing there. But I think that all these conversations with Ottavino over the years has really put in my head that it's a bridge pitch. It's a pitch that takes pressure off the other pitches. It's a surprise pitch. It's a pitch you can throw in the zone when they're expecting a fastball or a bigger slider or something else. It's a pitch that is glue. It's a glue pitch, and it is more dependent on location from research. It's a little bit more dependent on location than a lot of other pitches, but it's also easier to locate because he has a smaller movement profile. So, I think it could be a glue pitch for guys who have bad command. Be like, hey, this is a pitch you can command, I think that's something that they tried with Boyle and some other guys. It's like, here, try a gyro because, you can't command your fastball and you can't throw this other pitch you can command all the time. You have to throw something else too. So, I'm a big fan of gyro sliders, but I know that I understand that why somebody might not use them.
Anything else on your minds as far as this topic goes? I mean, I think there's a lot for people to think about here, but I just want to make sure I give you the chance to close the book on it if there's anything else you got left.
Yeah, I mean, I try to frame things in maybe a terms of development. And the Roki thing is really interesting because it represents a logical click. I think it's a good way to find how things might click for guys. And I think we see a theme here is a couple things are part of it. One, like closing those gaps is a real thing to approach, and it solves a lot of problems that lots of pitchers have. You're getting hit hard, you're not able to throw strikes, whatever. A lot of times it's finding something that is more predictable to move, or guys aren't expecting as much, and you're getting good outcomes on bat to ball. Like it does all of those things. But the other interesting thing is the concept that like when you're trying to get a guy to improve and you're trying to close that gap, or you're trying to find something else to solve a problem or help them out in certain situations, a good way to do it is work from whatever every major league pitcher has a pitch they can just you could just wake them up in the middle of the night and be like, throw this pitch, and they can do it more than other ones. Roki's is his forkball. That is a splitter side pitch. Now, I know there's not a lot of options there, but the splitter was one he didn't throw. That is that same concept class. Like it's the same type of thing you're thinking about. So if he throws a forkball well, let's try a splitter, even though that's weird and no one else does it. That doesn't matter. Maybe this is the pitch that we can bridge. And it seems like he had picked it up immediately because of course he did. So like a lot of guys who throw, Seth Lugo has been known publicly, and trust me, he is as proud of this as any person can be proud of anything. His ability to spin the ball. He's got the 3,000 spin rate curveball. We've heard about this forever. Colin McHugh was the same way too. He had all the confidence in the world that he could throw any breaking ball that existed under the sun eventually if you just gave him the grip. He could figure it out because that was so natural to him. So what you would do with a guy like Seth Lugo when he becomes a starter is like, let's see how many different breaking balls we can get you to the road, because it's something that you can just feel your way through, as opposed to like needing to throw a changeup, which isn't the thing that he's super comfortable in. So he's not going to throw a kick change and a splitter and a whatever, but he's doing it with the breaking balls because that's his natural category. So like, if you're looking at guys and you're trying to like, this guy's young and there's some gaps here, whatever, like the good organizations are going to be like, which one of these pitches is the one you do the best, and let's work from there and find additional grips, work to close those gaps as best we can. And there usually is, if there's a pitch from any direction, there is a pitch type because of microtones that can move you in that direction. You just figure out what it is, and there's a lot of ways to do that now. So you're going to see this happen a lot, where guys pick things up real quickly and they click, and usually it's going to be something like this.
Yeah, I think about this also in terms of like, hey, if we're looking at the young pitchers that are ascending right now, what are their aging patterns going to look like? Who's going to be the one, who are going to be the ones in the young hype pitchers right now who are going to be able to add pitches? It's sort of a playoff of what Trevor's talking about. You know, what can I look at their pitch movement charts right now and have a guess about where they would, you know, because I look at Chase Burns' chart and, you know, he throws an incredibly hard fastball, does not throw a sinker, and he throws a hard gyro slider. Those are his main pitches right now. I don't see a lot of great evidence that he's going to add here or he's going to add here. I would say throw a curveball, throw something that's a really big differential in velocity and movement. And can you throw a curveball that he's going to throw for strikes? Because then you can steal some strikes to the curveball and take some pressure off the four seam. But there's not even a single one there. He hasn't even tried it. Maybe he's tried it, before in college or the minors, but there's no major league curveball there. I can be like, oh, over here, he can do this. So I might be a little bit more pessimistic on Chase Burns's aging pattern than I might be about a Cam Schlittler. Now, Cam Schlittler has shown you the ability to throw a sinker, a four seam, and a cutter. Those are different quadrants, different fastballs. He has a curveball down there that he could emphasize more. And, I said this is a guy who could learn a split later, because he's already shown this ability with the fastballs. Let's treat it to him like, hey, this is a fastball. Think about it as a fastball. Just grip it like this. So I think Cam has shown the ability to add pitches in a way that maybe Chase Burns hasn't. And then I want to think of Jacob Mizorowski. Lance Brzezowski said, throw a sinker. That would be in a new quadrant That would be a new pitch for him. And I think it, given his proclivities, that could be something he can do. You have to think about if they're a pronator or not. Like you could say, oh, I want Bubba Chandler's sweeper to have more sideways movement. Well, he's a big pronator. Maybe he's never going to have a great breaking ball. So there's certain things to think about. I would prefer probably a supinator if I want somebody. You think back to all the guys that did the microtones. They're all supinators. Lugo, Fried, and Darvish, they're supinators. I think that's maybe why the Cubs love supinators so much. They think there's more spaces they can uncover. There's more pitches they can do with those guys. You can now, with a lot of the video stuff, you can now teach supinators good changeups and sinkers. I mean, there's
seam shifting too helps.
Yeah,
supinators handle seam shifting works for supinators better than does for pronators as well. So you have pitches as a supinator using a literal physical effect to get the arm side movement that pronation was supposed to do for you. So like, what's the point? You might as well just stay supinated when you release everywhere and just move that way.
I think that's been a big step forward. The pronators, I think, right now are behind it. The best thing that a pronator could do, I think, is talk about adding a second changeup. Playing around in that space, because like I was talking to Bubba Chandler, and he's like, "Yeah, I know my breaking balls aren't that great. They're hard, and that's my way out. I just throw the breaking ball as hard as I can."
Which is a solution, but it's not going to be the solution for him in the long run.
Right. Think about what I just said. You're talking about Bubba, who doesn't have great command, and all he can think about when he wants to throw a breaking ball is throw it as hard as possible. That means that his basic thought on every pitch is throw this as hard as possible, and then you get some of the command issues you've gotten with him.
It's still, I mean, we've made this comp on the show a few times before, but it's still so easy to see the current version of Chase Burns alongside like the 2023 version of Spencer Strider, and it's just like same guy. Like it could be the same kind of arc if he doesn't develop more feel for the other secondaries over time. It's going to work really well for a little while, maybe even more than a little while, but how that profile ages, I think, is going to depend upon how he makes those adjustments. We are going to take one quick break. When we come back, Henry Davis has a command model. Is that even the weirdest thing we've said on this show? We'll tell you about it when we come back. Welcome back to Rates and Barrels. You were in the clubhouse recently, and Henry Davis came over to you and said he's got a command model. Were you a little surprised by that? That didn't seem like a conversation that you'd ordinarily have with a major league catcher.
Yeah, he had a very specific question, which is he wanted to know how I might reward or score command in terms of should it be linear? Like should a 3-ball miss be three times worse than a 1-ball miss? Or should it be sort of exponential? And that was the beginning of the conversation. And I said, I think it should probably be exponential, because a waste pitch is terrible. A waste pitch has zero value, So, the further you get, the less value that pitch has. And so that was the beginning of the conversation. But he told me a little bit more about it, which is he has basically a sequencing command model that is born of catching Paul Skeens and this idea. I think he has a brother in mechanical engineering or something that is helping him do this. But he said that when Paul Skeens, when he calls a certain pitch for Paul Skeens, he thinks that pitch affects the command of the next pitch. And so specifically, he was saying that if I call for a high and away four-seam to righties to Paul Skeens, and then I go sweeper, that sweeper tends to drift upwards. It tends to sort of go where the last pitch went, And so I had a couple questions for Trevor. Does that sound right? Does the command of one pitch, depend on what pitch you threw before? And then you did some cool number crunching, and you created a graph for us that suggests that Henry Davis has something here.
Yeah, I think that he does, and we pulled up Skeens in his sweeper. Now there's something I think unique about Skeens' sweeper and how he likes to use it. He's actually not a huge fan of like sweeping a slider off the plate to a righty. For some reason, he'd rather kind of go to his changeup and his splinker for the swings and misses. I think maybe because it's different than a lot of other things, but He likes to mostly throw this for strikes to like lefties, which is just against most common, I guess, common rule of thumb. So, but that said, there still is a little bit of a pattern here because I think this is a little bit of a pitcher nature, human nature thing, but it also makes me think of the concept behind the Rays and their one target, right? It's like throw everything at this one target, even if the pitch, you don't actually necessarily want it to land there. It's the same kind of idea that if command, the goal subconsciously for pitchers has been, if you get that pitch up there, one, it's the pitch you just did. So repeating the pitch your body remembers the most recently is your best chance. So there's a repetition thing going. But then there's also this like set them up, tunnel it off of that pitch processing that is kind of layered in at every level when you're making a decision. And so what happens is you can repeat the motion and you're trying to tunnel it off that pitch. So basically, if you're trying to throw a sweeper up and away, you're going to have it land a little bit higher and maybe a little bit more off the plate. But that's by design because it's a tunneling situation. So if that is what you're trying to do, you're trying to have those pitches have a relation to themselves, unless you're consciously trying to do the opposite. For example, like you're like a Logan Webb type, and you throw a sinker away to a righty, and then you throw like a sweeper that just comes back and goes front hip, and they're just completely different pitches. But that was the point. You're trying to get as far away from tunnel as possible. But that's not as common as what Henry's talking about. And as a guy who's calling pitches, 98% of the guys he catches are going to pretty much operate in this way. So that model, I think, logically makes a lot of sense because that is the calculus going on in a pitcher's head and very clearly a catcher's head.
Yeah, so on this graph that you put together, in blue is the high and away four seamer. So you asked the model, your data to give you all high and away four seams, and you and I both sort of looked at that and said, "Wow, like he's got pretty good command of that pitch." And then the question was, show me pitches that came right after that were sweepers.
Yeah.
So in red, these are pitchers sequenced right after high and away four seams. And that's why I think maybe Davis has something here, because if you assume that the target for the sweepers was low and away, there's a lot of drift in the sweepers. You see a lot of high sweepers. You see high sweepers that didn't get down off the side of the plate, sort of thigh high. You see high sweepers that end up going right to where that four seam was. So there could be something there. The one thing that Henry has that we don't have is he knows the intended target, because he is the source of that intended target. But, in a practical sense, Trevor, what could a pitcher do about this? Let's say you play for a team that has multiple targets and they give you the high and away target, and your next pitch needs to be low. Like, I guess can you be intentional about it? Like, I have to throw this even lower than I think,
Yeah.
Do you have to?
That's believe it or not, that's super old school thinking. Change your targets is what I was taught in 2019 or 2009 when I was struggling at the beginning, and just like if you miss in the same spot over and over again, that's usually like, oh, you're missing up and in as a righty of throwing four seams to a righty. Like, maybe we just move our target over and like let the ball naturally. How do you naturally miss? And so that's part of it. So like, yeah, sometimes you're like, imagine this is a fastball going down, like we're not throwing in that same tunnel again, and you have to be it's got to be front of mind, not just like generally you're going over. You have to be like, okay, I am throwing down and away now, and that is probably when we're seeing these ones going down and off the plate. But it's funny, there's a clustering kind of close, and then there's this gap, and then there's a cluster down that's like a cluster of misfires, and that is a common thing when you're trying to not throw the high one, you're trying to force it. Like, you usually, righties tend to yank, or they leave stuff up and arm side. Even Paul Skeens, there's a lot here where you're around the ball, or you hold on to it too long and you're between the release point there. And so that is your natural way. This diagonal of missing is normal. And so it's hard to do when the target is up and away. And, but in general, I would say this is Paul Skeens, like, he's doing a pretty good job of it, as good as he can. I bet you this would be much more tightly clustered, maybe, or you see a lot more high for other guys who do the same thing. So this is pretty much as good as it gets.
A sweeper is a seam shifted pitch too. So like sometimes it catches the seam and goes, and sometimes it doesn't. You know?
It can be inconsistent in that way too. Yeah, there's forces at play. The wind can be blowing weird, which affect that pitch way more than others. But it is a good way to see how like overcorrection can happen because of that huge variation.
Yeah, he never misses middle with it, even if he misses everywhere else.
Yeah, there's a donut there.
Pretty good
It's
at that.
Perfect gap in the heart of the zone where he's not leaving it there. Yeah, this
I
is
just
really
love that
cool.
Henry Davis is, sitting there behind the plate thinking about these things, and everyone's yelling at him, "You're a bomb," and he's like, "Yes, but what about my sequential command theory?"
One of us, one of us,
exactly.
one of us. Let's go. I mean, it's incredible. Like I feel like the inner monologues of some players would really disappoint a lot of us, but then there'd be some like that would be like pretty great. So.
Yeah, I was always talking to Sam Fold early in my career because he had these questions. I just come up to him and be like, "What do you think about now?" And he's like, "What if we had the left fielder and right fielder switch spots depending on who was at the plate?" And I was like, "Yes, yeah, you're gonna work in the front office someday."
And then at the other end, it's like the inner monologues of, I don't know, like Drew Gilbert or the Giants' entire outfield. It's like, I don't want to know what's going on in your guys' head right now. Let's just keep that one to yourselves.
Logan,
boys.
why did you throw that pitch? Cal said. And that's a great way to do it when you got Cal Raleigh. I don't hate that at all.
Yeah.
I do like that the image that Trevor generated has our buddy Paul Sporer standing in as the hitter. Like, I think that's a really nice hitter. Touch. Very, very tall.
Yeah, these generator things have not figured out the hitter thing. I've been trying to get it done. Sometimes it's just like a bat, like cocked out, like just weirdly leaning. I'm like, just put a silhouette. Like, what are we doing here?
Search the internet for a picture of a person and take the details out.
I see Sporer swinging one of those miniature giveaway bats that you get. That's what I see with my eyes right now. On that note, we're going to go. You can join our Discord with the link in the show description. Weigh in on the conversation there. I'm sure a lot of you have some fascinating ideas about this concept of microtoning or even the command model that Henry Davis is working on. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Friday.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to hit that subscribe or follow button so you never miss an episode. If you enjoyed it, drop us a like, leave a rating, or sound off in the comments. We'll see you next time.